I now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 14 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on January 20th, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of marine cargo container spills. I'm not going to go through everything about the hybrid format and how to get everything goes through the chair. We've heard that often enough, and about social distancing. So we'll go right to our participants. I'd also like to remind all participants that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. I would now like to welcome witnesses for the first panel today. We have from the Nanaimo Port Authority, Captain Singh, Vice President, Marine Operations and Harbour Master, and as well from the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, we have Captain Madiwal, Director, Marine Operations and Harbour Master. I'd like to welcome back, of course, Madame Gaudreau to committee today, and also Mr. Paulus, if I pronounced that right, I hope. Welcome back, sir. It's good to have you here. We'll now begin with opening remarks from Captain Singh for 5 minutes or less, please. Captain Singh? You're muted.
Thank you, Chair, for helping me unmute. I can hear myself echo for some reason. Now it's okay. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak about MV Zim Kingston. I would like to start by saying that safety, security, and sustainability were the pillars upon which Nanaimo Port Authority undertook the salvage operation of Zim Kingston. I had the privilege to represent the port in the initial Unified Command discussions pertaining to safety, security, and environmental protection. The ship was held to a very high level of scrutiny and safety protocols, which included regulatory requirements. Once NPA was satisfied with the protocols that would be in place, the vessel was permitted to conduct salvage operations at DP World Duke Point. During the salvage operation, the port played an integral role in terms of ongoing safety, security, and environmental protection protocols that were adhered at Nanaimo Port Authority. One example of this was when the ship sustained a fire on board during the salvage operation. On behalf of Nanaimo Port Authority, I had rescinded all hot work permits on the ship until my investigation was complete. And I was satisfied that the proper safety protocols would be adhered to. I also attended the vessel at different instances to make sure that the processes were adhered to. I investigated the incident in particular with this fire incident through interviews on board Zim Kingston of the salvage team and the ship's crew. The practical assessment of hot work process was also observed physically, and the hot work permit was reinstated for the vessel to carry on with its operations. It is noteworthy that Zim Kingston was successful. Excuse me, I'm recovering from COVID. It is noteworthy that Zim Kingston was successful in terms of completing the operation. The disposal process was administered with very high level of diligence in terms of safety protocols, including regulatory requirements in cooperation with the terminal operator, which was DP World in our case. Case in point, Zim Kingston owners commented on their reception of the Port of Nanaimo as follows. One comment that I received was, from our experience during the vessel stay at the Port of Nanaimo, would like to point out your prompt response to our inquiries, and the availability of anchorage was in the of anchorage when was needed for our vessel. The second comment was environmental protection protocols were followed to the utmost detail in accordance with submitted cargo discharge plan. Your quick response to safety issues that were raised during our operation towards risk assessment and implementation of mitigation actions was remarkable. Some other salient points worth noting here are that no other facility was able to accommodate Zim Kingston salvage operation in the Western region due to variables such as congestion and time it would take to unload the damaged containers. We didn't allow the ship to offload at anchor, which was a ship barge operation, because it was considered unsafe and dangerous in line with Sanemo First Nation input. who are partners and have a relationship agreement with Nanaimo Port Authority. We respected the First Nation response and looked for other options to complete the operation, which led to the DP World solution. NPA also notes that DP World had DP World been an active container facility, lost revenue would be a decision-making consideration. Variables could lend the terminal less flexible in administering this operation. All the same, NPA would have explored active vessel management options in collaboration with terminal to facilitate the operation. I have a process timeline which starts from October 24th and it ends in February, excuse me, on February 2nd, 2022, when Zim Kingston left Nanaimo Port Authority for its next port of call. The process started with Nanaimo Port Authority being abreast of the situation just through CCG, Western Region Victoria, MCTS information bulletins and news outlets. On 29th, it was a general TC Marine Advisory Committee that reached out to various stakeholders. And on November 4th is when the agent initially initiated conversation with Nanaimo Port Authority. My time is up, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll now go to Captain Madiwal for his 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Sri Madiwal. I'm Director of Marine Operations and Harbour Master at the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Let me start by acknowledging that the Port Authority's Canada Place offices on the ancestral land of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and I extend thanks to them. The Vancouver Fraser Port Authority is the federal agency responsible for the stewardship of lands and water that makes the Port of Vancouver Canada's largest port. As a Canadian Port Authority, our mandate is to enable Canada's trade through the Port of Vancouver while protecting the environment and considering local communities. Our role as a Port Authority is to ensure goods are moved safely, efficiently, and sustainably, and we do this by providing the marine infrastructure and services that provides for a high level of safety and environmental protection. Vessel safety is a shared responsibility, and the Port Authority works closely with other federal agencies like Transport Canada, Canadian Coast Guard, and the Pacific Pilotage Authority to ensure that the vessels calling the Port of Vancouver navigate and operate safely. The Port of Vancouver has an industry-leading safety record on vessel navigation. In 2020, the Pacific Pilotage Authority reported 99.90 incident-free assignments, and this has been consistent in the last few years. In case of an incident or an emergency within our jurisdiction, the Port Authority is not the first responder. We rely on other federal and local emergency services. We collaborate with other organizations such as Canadian Coast Guard, Canada Border Services Agency, RCMP, and local police and municipalities to oversee the safety, security, and respond to any incident within the port. We work with them on the emergency response planning to promote safety and emergency preparedness. Usually this takes forms of working with the first responders and other agencies, providing information on the situation through our 24/7 operations center, our security cameras, our patrol boats, and our drones. I would like to take this opportunity to express my deep appreciation to the Canadian Coast Guard team. The services like oil spill response, search and rescue, the marine traffic control keeps Canadian waters and our coast safe. I would be remiss if I did not mention the Government of Canada's investment in the 2 emergency towing vessels in the south coast of British Columbia. The 2 leased vessels have proved useful since its deployment in 2018. These vessels are critical emergency response assets on the coast and play an important role during incident response. In closing, I just want to reiterate that though we have an excellent safety record in the port and in the south coast of BC, marine accidents can occur anytime, and we need to be prepared to respond and protect the mariners, the marine environment, including Indigenous local communities and surrounding waters. Thank you, Chair, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you for that. And to both of you, you went a little bit under time for each one, so that was really appreciated. Before I go to rounds of questioning, I will let members know that I'm going to get a little stricter on the time. So I've got little warning cards to let you all know where you're to with your time. because it seems like we're losing time as we go through each list of questions, and somebody suffers then in the end for it. So I'll try and be a little bit more stricter. So we'll now go to questions. Of course, we'll go to Mr. Perkins for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for trying to keep us on time, because you've been very kind in letting everybody play a little, and we don't want to let have our other members fall short and have an inability to answer. And I want to thank both witnesses very much for coming and appearing on this important study, in particular Mr. Singh for your kindness and willingness to be on here while you're still recovering from COVID, which is luckily, knock on wood, I've yet to have, but I'm glad to see that you're on the road to recovery. I'm going to refrain from having my desire to ask both witnesses about the new labor regulations that came in force on February 1st affecting ports that are hurting our ports in Atlantic Canada, to get your opinions, but I'll stay away from that for now. Mr. Singh, I think you ran out of time on your presentation, so I wonder if you could maybe start from the beginning, and then when Mr. Singh's done, Mr. Mardiwal, if you could do the same, to sort of go through a chronology of how and when you found out about the incident with the Kingston and what the various stages of your response to that was and your involvement, please.
Thank you for the question. I did actually send the chronological order of how Nanaimo Port Authority got involved. I'll start by saying that initially my office was abreast of the updates related to Zim Kingston as they were being disseminated through Canadian Coast Guard Western Region, Victoria MCTS, and other news outlets. Last update that I could find in my email was from October 24th. On October 29th, Transport Canada, through Canadian Maritime Advisory Committee, reached out to my office and advised that the assessments were being done on the vessel's seaworthiness, and Transport Canada representatives were actively working with Incident Command to review plans related to the eventual movement of Zim Kingston from its current location to an appropriate yet to be determined berth or anchorage. On November 4th, Navitrans Shipping Agency reached out to Nanaimo Port Authority with the introduction and advising that they had already received guidance as to the requirement from Vancouver Fraser Port Authority to proceed to Vancouver Anchorage. However, it appeared that English Bay weather may be too rough to discharge safely, and they felt a better option was looking at Nanaimo Anchorage. Navitrans Shipping Agency requested my thoughts as a harbor master and requirements to explore the option to proceed to an Nanaimo Anchorage to discharge damaged containers that have been secured on board. Discharge at that point was planned through a float crane and barge with a full comprehensive plan that would be provided to Nanaimo Port Authority. On November 6th, I requested further information in terms of CBSA contact for this initiative, TC contact for this initiative, CCG contact for this initiative, ship's charterer representative, ship's legal counsel, ship's owner representative. On November 7th, a unified command was convened by Canadian Coast Guard, which included the following: incident commander as myself, incident commander as Nanaimo First Nation representative, incident commander as a provincial representative, incident commander as owner of Zim Kingston, and owners, contractors, and other environmental leads from Environment and Climate Change Canada. Between 7th of November and December 2nd, NPA worked with agents as primary contact and unified commands as a secondary to facilitate the salvage operation feasibility at Nanaimo Port Authority. Some of the things that we dealt with were CBSA initially couldn't discharge in Nanaimo because there is no approval facility in Nanaimo for container discharge. Therefore, based on customs rules and regulations, technically they couldn't allow the ship to discharge at Nanaimo. First Nation engagement and response was encouraged through Nanaimo Port Authority and Unified Command. We worked together collaboratively to collectively come up with a solution in terms of their first option, which was to discharge at anchor. Transit plan was reviewed and confirmation sought that TC was on board. TC had no concerns, which was later conveyed to Nanaimo Port Authority. Container discharge plan was reviewed and confirmation sought that TC, Environment Canada, Canadian Coast Guard were on board. Canadian Coast Guard and TC had no concerns with the discharge plan. Fire and salvage plan was reviewed. Transit environmental risk review was reviewed and confirmation sought that TC, EC, and CCG were on board. TC and Canadian Coast Guard had no concerns. Safe working procedures were reviewed with focus on Nanaimo Port Authority operations, and confirmation sought that TC was on board with the operational feasibility. It was conveyed that TC does not have a role in approving the safe work procedures for this operation. So it was the Nanaimo Port Authority dependent on the ship's operator to provide all information, and we reviewed that information and approved it. Concept of operation air quality monitoring was reviewed, and confirmation sought that Environment Canada and CBSA were on board with that initiative. Concept of operation baseline water monitoring plan was reviewed and approvals were confirmed. CCG had no further concern with this concept as well. Overview of waste management plan was reviewed and confirmation requested from TC that it was appropriate. TC did not have a role in approving this as it was conveyed to the Nanaimo Port Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. The 6 minutes allotted to Mr. Perkins has gone a little bit over. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses this morning. Captain Singh, again, I'm sorry that we're going to ask you a lot of questions and you're struggling to get over the bug. I hope it hasn't been too serious for you. Well, the fire on the Zim Kingston started in a reefer unit, I understand?
That is correct. The fire actually resulted from an adjacent container being worked on and a spark meeting the fire container, the reefer container insulation.
Oh, okay. A reefer unit, for people listening in, that's a refrigerated unit, obviously for goods that need to be kept cold. What do they use to power the refrigeration units on these containers?
I cannot answer that question because I don't have factual information in what they use to power the reefer unit.
Well, that's something that would be interesting because it'd be necessary to know, what kind of, if there's fuel involved, et cetera, and the location of the reefer unit, was it above deck or below? I guess it was above deck, right?
It was adjacent to the work being performed, the hot work being performed.
But it wasn't below deck. It was up in kind of the open air.
Correct. It was exposed to the open air. And the reason the spark got away and got into the reefer container was because fire blanket did not cover the reefer unit fully. Okay.
Now, securing containers is obviously, something that's really important. They stack them very, very high. Was there any sense that the systems used to secure the containers failed, or was it just simply the weather was too rough for any kind of system to work properly?
My understanding, and because I visited the ship as well, I did not feel that the containers were stacked too high or over the limit of stacking. I felt that inclement weather resulted in the unfortunate incident that the vessel met.
Captain Mariwal, we obviously are concerned when containers fall overboard, but do you notice close calls? Do you notice ships coming into port? They may have not lost anything, but things have moved around fairly substantially, especially above deck.
Yeah, Ken, that's a great question. Thanks for the opportunity to answer that. In case of the container strength securing arrangements, the locations, the International Maritime Organization has very strict guidelines around what needs to be done, and all the class surveys that has been done for the vessels, the construction, they ensure that those things are followed. The question specifically to the Port of Vancouver, I would not be able to comment on that because we have not received any information whether the containers have been shifted or been lost during the transit. In case if any incident occurs, the report definitely goes through the marine occurrence system to Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board. And those are the things that we would track. But unfortunately, we have not had any incident that would be considered in the same scenario.
Though hear from the dock workers if a ship came into port with shifted cargo that made offloading those containers more dangerous to the workers?
I think this question would be better answered by the ILWU or BCMEA. I wouldn't have that information to comment on.
To Captain Singh or to you, Captain Madawal, MCTS operations were under the microscope of this committee 6 years ago now, with the closure of the Comox base and the shifting of everything down to Victoria, to Sydney, I guess it was. Do you have any reflections, any reports, any monitoring of those systems and their reliability? Particularly concerned with outages where communication with vessels breaks down simply because a system goes offline at the MCTS location.
Yeah, I would like to start first with the MCTS and the Canadian Coast Guard service. It's a world-class service that we have in Canada, and I think we need to be really proud of the service that is provided by Canadian Coast Guard. In terms of their redundancy in the systems and backup, I think we have a Victoria station and we also have one in Prince Rupert. They always back up each other as well. And with all the coverage that is available through the south coast of BC and even to the north, is all captured under the MCTS. And I believe even within their control center, they have equipment redundancy as well. So even if
can I get a quick answer from Captain Singh on that? Do you share Captain Madawal's sentiments with regard to MCTS, sir?
Yes, I do. And I will add that, yes, we have had power outages, and yes, we have worked with MCTS to provide that redundancy as well here at Nanaimo Port Authority. Yes, we have marine domain awareness system that was leveraged during that time. I think it's a partnership, Ken, if you may, that really works well at the in the western region of Canada here. Everybody works together well. Thank you.
We'll now go to Madame Gaudreau for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, Captain Singh. I wish you a quick recovery from COVID. I heard everything that you said regarding the details in terms of collaboration, follow-up, protocols, etc. Receiving notices that everything was being respected. However, this being said, I have also heard from Mr. Madawal in a very specific sentence when there was being a reference to such an incident, there is a form of collaboration. I'd like to hear from Mr. Madawal about what you mean, because Mr. Singh, you talked about the whole process, but I'd like to hear about what the collaboration is when there's an emergency, when you say there's a form of.
For your question, can I answer?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. In terms of the collaboration, the lead agency in such marine casualty has been assigned to the Canadian Coast Guard. The Canadian Coast Guard manages the incident command system and also include all the relevant other agencies that is responsible to kind of support the incident command within the incident command post. And that's what the collaboration means like. So for example, if there is an incident in the Port of Vancouver jurisdiction, We will be part of the response team, and also we'll be part of the incident command, working with the federal, provincial, local, municipal response agencies, and also with the Transport Canada and other federal agencies. So that was my gist when I mentioned that we do collaborate on those issues.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. My next question refers to the inquiry system. I'd like to hear what your expertise is in this area. When there is a spill where there could be ecological, environmental issues, and this is my great concern, how can we find solutions so that this kind of situation no longer occurs? I'm thinking of our future generations, as I was saying earlier this week. Is there an investigative mechanism to assess a form of guilt or fault? And second question, to your knowledge, are there any fines, or is there anything that's sufficiently significant upstream to make sure that things are more preventive? I'd like to hear both of you on this subject, please.
I can go first. The Transport Safety Board investigates all incidents and provide factual information in terms of how those incidents could be mitigated with best practices in the future. They are an independent agency that does provide that information, which could be leveraged for the benefit of the committee as well when they are exploring options. In terms of blame, I personally don't think that finding blame or placing blame allows for a way in which we can improve things. I find that working together collaboratively and including everybody from the onset, bringing people who have expertise and are subject matter experts to the table from the onset can expedite and mitigate risks for the marine industry in the future. In case of Zim Kingston, Nanaimo Port Authority got engaged later after discussions were already in place with other entities. I believe if Nanaimo Port Authority was included from the onset of when the incident occurred and when discussions were starting to happen, there would have been a shorter timeline to manage the salvage operation and also to mitigate or come up with a plan in terms of mitigating the risks in future. Thank you.
Merci. J'aimerais justement...
Thank you. Now, do you share that opinion, Mr. Madawal? Do you think that the Port Authority should have been more?
Oui, et celle-ci aussi.
Yes, and also to this one, do you agree with this in this availability?
I wouldn't fully agree. I have a little different opinion on that. So in terms of the oil spill prevention and preparedness, I think we have done a lot in the country. In Canada, there are strict regulations under the Canada Shipping Act on the vessels, and also in terms of the preparedness of early detection response. And we have one of the world-class, again, oil spill response facility in the west coast of BC. In terms of liability for oil spill response, again, we have the Oil Spill Liability Convention. We have the Ship Source Oil Pollution Fund, where everyone contributes, and in case if the liability exceeds of the ship owner's insurance, that fund kicks in. Similar to that, especially when we took in the context of the Zim Kingston, when we have packaged goods and not an oil spill, those things are also covered under the hazardous noxious convention or the fund that Canada was very early on to adopt and ratify of the IMO convention. So yes, the short answer is that the ship owner is still liable first to kind of address all the environmental issues, recover and repair. And when the ship owner's liability exceeds, the fund definitely kicks in and also provides some additional benefit to the local communities so that there is no damage to the environment as a cost that is available to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses who are here today. So nice to see you, Captain Singh, and wanted to just acknowledge my appreciation for you taking me on a great tour of the work that you were doing in the Port of Nanaimo related to the Zim Kingston. So it's nice to have you here, and also to Captain Madawal. I hope that we have a chance to meet in person soon. I wanted to expand a little bit, Captain Singh, on something that you touched on related to the timeliness of communications with the Port of Nanaimo and being able to respond to the Zim Kingston. And we know that the Zim Kingston was anchored along the coast for about a month before it reached the Port of Nanaimo. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about why that was the case, and do you think it posed any additional risks having the Zim Kingston anchored for about a month? I think you're muted, Captain Singh. There you are.
Sorry. Yes, that's exactly what I was wondering. Thank you. And yes, the answer to that question is there was a delay in managing the Zim Kingston incident, and I do believe that Nanaimo Port Authority was included after all other options were exhausted. And Nanaimo Port Authority, if was included from the onset at the table to discuss options for Zim Kingston, perhaps the vessel would have been in Nanaimo sooner. I do not know in actuality if that would be the case, but I would suspect that it would be, considering we were looking for a solution to help Zim Kingston. Constance Bank was not the best location for the vessel to remain, and that is why the agent, when they reached out to Nanaimo Port Authority, they were very anxious to move very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Singh. I saw firsthand the amount of people involved and the process of sorting debris, and it's quite the process, requiring a lot of hands on a lot of people on the ground and a lot of leadership, making sure that all the pieces are being taken care of. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to that, specifically around the port's process for debris disposal from the ship and how you ensure it's managed safely for people and the environment.
Yes, we had a waste management plan from Zim Kingston that was provided to Nanaimo Port Authority, and in collaboration with the terminal, Nanaimo Port Authority was assured that the disposal would take place as per their register in terms of what type of waste would be disposed, how, and who would be the operator, and who would be the recognized facility that would be receiving that waste. And once that was satisfied, everybody worked great, as you had seen firsthand, Marie. It was a really good experience, just watching how people can really come together and do a great job to facilitate a solution. And it speaks to humanity as a whole. Thank you.
This question is for Captain Madawal. One of the concerns that we heard is, that we're hearing ongoing, is around the increased amount of cargo containers that are being shipped in our waters, the increased height. We're seeing that the shipments are getting larger, they're getting higher, and there's all these other pieces, of course, around the extreme weather patterns that we're seeing. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit around how ports are keeping up with this demand and with all of the complexity of the shipping that seems to be happening more and more so.
Thank you, Lisa, for that question. I'll phase it into part. First is around safety. So the container vessel size has eventually, in the last decade or so, has grown considerably. As you know, the container is supposed to be one of the best invention in this decade, where so many items have been shipped through the containers. While though the largest container ship is about 24,000 TEUs, that is the 20-foot equivalent unit, in the west coast of North America, I would say, including, we don't see large vessels that has been deployed in this Trans-Pacific run. So, for example, the largest vessel that would call the Port of Vancouver would be around 13,000 to 14,000 TEU. So, compared to what the world deals and manages, the large vessels, it is fairly medium-sized vessels, I would say, that calls at the Port of Vancouver. So overall, for the safety reasons, I don't think so we have a challenge around that. We still have a lot of facilities that can accommodate much larger vessels safely, but it's entirely up to the supply and demand and the carriers which deploy those vessels in the zone. The second thing around the demand and the global supply chain challenges. So the pandemic has definitely changed the spending habits of Canadians, just like everywhere else in the world. So that has definitely spiked the demand. So just last year, our container volumes have grown up by 6% annually. And then that was a big increase. We handled about 3.7 million containers in the Port of Vancouver. The demand continues to grow, and we think that we're going to soon run out of capacity in a very short term in the west coast of BC, and that's a big challenge for not only BC but also for Canada. And that's where we're working with all the partners to kind of see what infrastructure would like to kind of support and the growing needs of the port, but also of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. You're gone a little bit over, so we'll end it there. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Singh and Mr. Madawal. I'll start off with Mr. Singh, I guess, if hopefully you can answer the question. Who is responsible for determining and confirming the security of cargo on board a vessel as it comes into or exits Canadian waters?
CBSA.
CBSA is responsible for that?
Yes, it is.
And the ship captain or shipmaster has to pass on that certification information?
Yes, the ship's master will provide all documentation that CBSA requires to administer their regulations accordingly. Yeah.
And does that include the security of, or the securing of containers on board the vessel and the ship's stability assessment?
Negative. That would be the ship's captain's responsibility. Containers coming into Canada and being offloaded here in Canada on terminals would be CBSA responsibility to make sure that they are screened and properly managed. In terms of terminal, they also have a responsibility in terms of marine facility security plan, which looks after the overall terminal posture of security.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We've heard that the ship may have delayed coming into port on its way in, and could you, either of you, confirm or say if that is the case, and if it did delay coming in, can you elaborate why?
I can answer that question, Mel. Thanks for the question. So the Zim Kingston was actually loitering out at sea when the incident occurred, and in the high seas and the bad weather. At that time, there was anchorages available in the port jurisdiction. Unfortunately, the Port Authority did not receive any request for anchoring the vessel in the port. So I wouldn't be able to comment on that. It would be the ship owner or the agent would be the right party to comment why the vessel was still loitering when there was a safe refuge or anchorage available in the port. In addition to that, I would just like to also highlight the use of anchorages and the congestion that we are seeing in the port. And this is because of two major issues. One is the pandemic related issues where many vessels have been having some COVID cases and requires quarantine. And in addition to that, also the global supply chain challenges that has really caused the whole supply chain to create a lot of disrupting activities. In addition to that, last year in 2021 in BC, we had major weather events.
I'll have to ask you to be brief. If you would wish to provide further information, we'd be happy to receive it in writing. We have limited time for our questions. You mentioned the contract tow vessels that are now on the West Coast. I believe those you're referring to the two that were contracted in 2018 for a period of 3 years, and then that contract was renewed in November of 2021 for only 1 year. Do you know if there's any long-term plans for tow vessels on the West Coast? This 3-term with a 1-year extension is almost up, and leads to questions as what's the West Coast capacity going to be in the future?
Yeah, I unfortunately, Mel, I don't have any response to that or any indication on what the government's plan is around the extension or a national strategy on emergency towing.
Okay, thank you. The tracking of the lost containers, we know that there are 2, or we've heard that there are 2 that contain toxic materials that have not been recovered. What gaps are there in tracking or finding those 2 containers to make sure those toxic chemicals aren't released into the environment?
I don't have any information again on that. Sorry, Mel. I think that will be the question more suited for Canadian Coast Guard, who have been involved in tracking the containers.
Okay, thank you. The response time to the initial calls for assistance, do you have any information as to what those response times were, and were they adequate to service the vessel's requirements?
Yes, so the initial fire incident was reported by the ship at approximately 12:45, and the Coast Guard did the first rescue operation somewhere around 17:30 to 1800. And the first vessels that arrived on scene were the Maersk Tender and Trader. And those were the vessels of opportunity. That was close to midnight. So that was almost about 18 hours later. And then on that next day morning, 6:30, that the emergency towing vessel was on site. There were some additional Coast Guard ships, but they wouldn't be able to assist with the firefighting operation. So that's the information that we know right now in terms of the response timings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. And either captain can answer the question, but following up from Ms. Barron, container traffic, shipping container traffic has increased significantly over the past decade, one would say the past 20 years. My opinion is it's the most efficient, most cost-effective way of moving goods, also the most environmentally friendly, because the large volume that's moved with little fuel consumption certainly has a big impact on reducing carbon emissions. So could you comment just briefly on what impact you've seen on the West Coast in the growth in the past year? Because Canada, we're a net exporting country and importing. So is my assumption correct that the container vessels are becoming bigger and more efficient? Captain Mediwal?
Thank you so much for the question, Robert. Yes, the short answer is yes. As vessels grow larger, the carriers are looking at achieving economies of scale so that they can actually support the growing trade demands both in Canada. There's a perception that the container vessels only support the import trade, and many people are not aware that they also support a lot of exports through Canada. So a lot of grain exports also happen, specialty crops grows through the container as well. So in the last decade, we have seen a consistent growth in the container trade, and the prognosis and the forecast looks again very strong. Last year was again an anomaly in terms of the growth that we expected. It was almost the growth that we would have seen in the next 3 years was achieved in year 1. And that's where
the energy consumed on a tonnage of goods moving by container overseas would be the lowest cost of moving of any transportation mode. Would I be correct?
That is correct. Any mode of transportation, the carriage by sea is the lowest in terms of the emission standards.
This dramatic growth in container traffic and the size, could you comment on the incidents at sea of losing containers? It's limited or minor. Would I be correct in that assumption? I mean, when an incident occurs, it gets worldwide news and international news, but they do not happen a lot. Is that a correct assumption?
That is correct. And most of the incidents that has happened with the lost containers is related to the weather, but far few in between.
And we can't, weather is weather. We cannot control that with anything. I want you to comment briefly on, Captain Matthew, on the, what was the situation like prior to 2018? You referenced in your statements the 2 leased vessels, and Mr. Arnold referenced. What was there before these 2 vessels were contracted by the Government of Canada?
We didn't have anything.
We had nothing.
So we had nothing.
So this
we
is a
used to rely on the private companies.
Okay, so the response time and the infrastructure and the capability has significantly improved with these 2 vessels.
That's correct.
So it's essential that we go there. So could you just... okay, thank you, Captain. I want to go to Captain Singh. You stated the Nanaimo port should have been involved sooner. It would have shortened the salvage time or response time. Could you explain briefly on how it would have reduced the time and may have mitigated the damage, the environmental damage?
Yes, definitely. How it would have expedited the process would be that we would have all the information to work with that was already disseminated with various parties prior to Nanaimo Port Authority being involved. Having that information from the onset would have allowed decision-making and internal meetings to be had, and Nanaimo First Nation being engaged early on in the process as well. I think those are the things that I was alluding to. Thank you.
30 seconds. Again, both of you referenced and you thanked the collaboration and the interaction between the Canadian Coast Guard and your Port Things and Dealing. Could you just, in your closing comments, again reference the committee on the working environment between the port, the authorities responsible in mitigating these incidents?
Yes, my comment is just as simple as the committee is a committee because all of you great minds come together to come up with a solution. Similarly, in Western Region, all port authorities, Canadian Coast Guard, PC, RCMP, and all other partners come together to find a collective solution. Thank you.
No deficiencies in any of those federal government bodies?
I'll let Vancouver Fraser Port Authority talk about it.
Yeah. My thought on that, Robert, is that no one agency has the entire bandwidth to kind of deal with such a major casualty. And we have to work at all 3 federal level, federal, provincial, local level, and the other agents to kind of support. And I think we have established a good emergency response framework. We tried, tested, did a lot of exercises as well, and the system is functioning.
Thank you, Mr. Morsi. We'll now go to Madame Gaudreau for 2.5 minutes, please.
On va y aller. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So, Captain Singh, initially when I was talking to you about investigations, you were referring to some documents, and I tried to check in the last few minutes. I don't think that we've received these documents. Perhaps we could check with the chair, but the documents would be very much appreciated to enable us to make our recommendations. So I would like to know whether you will be able to provide those documents to us. Also, just before, there was some issue of timing. There was 11:45 and then 6 p.m. until the first people came on site. Now, we all know that there is a communications problem here. But what's reassuring to me is that there was not a lack of interest or ill intentions, but we have to really take the bull by the horns and say, this is no longer acceptable given the technology we have and the kind of prevention that's required to save and maintain our planet in as much health as possible. Do you agree with me that it is urgent for this committee to be able to make recommendations for a very important application that you said initially that there was an increase of, what, a 6% increase in terms of import-export. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. And yes, there's a lack of communication, but is there anything else? Do you have any spontaneous ideas just to give us a hand? I'd like to hear from you on that, if possible. Thank you.
I'll just say that I'll check with the internal counsel to make sure that I don't contravene any rules in terms of providing that information, and I'm happy to provide all that information to the committee so that committee can come up with a solution in the future.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
Maintenant, ma
Thank you,
question.
Carolyn. I would answer the question around the response timing. I think it's extremely important that the response time framework needs to be developed in Canada. Unfortunately, we do not have a response timing. So with our neighbors down south, this was one of the issues that they have actually addressed through the Oil Pollution Act 1990 around emergency response and framework, so that everyone has an agency responsible for that. And also, depending on the location of the vessel, the assets needs to be strategically located where they should be able to respond in that minimum time. And that is something that is missing within the Canadian framework.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm finding these questions and answers really interesting. Thank you. One thing that I was reflecting on is that, in reality, even just one container falling into our oceans is one too many. And I've learned that in 2020, 2021, just as one example, there were approximately 3,000 containers in the winter of 2020, 2021, containers that fell into the Pacific Ocean. And so, in light of that, there's a huge impact on our marine environment, as well as on our coastal communities. And I'm wondering, Captain Madawal, if you can speak a little bit to some suggestions that are being made to me around a possible solution of placing a eco fee on shipping containers that would be paid by the shippers, and wondering if you might share some of the thoughts that you have around that, whether there would be any impacts to you at the Port of Vancouver, and if you anticipate any challenges in implementing such a eco fee.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for that question. I think any fee when we implement is always going to be tough for any entity. But I think what we need to kind of look at the broader perspective is to kind of look at the competitiveness of Canada as a whole. Is that are we creating in this thing where the cost of bringing goods is going to increase, and that is also going to kind of the cost is going to be passed over to the buyers and the users and the consumers, I would say. In addition to that, I think that the separate aspect is, does the dangerous goods which you referenced around the containers needs to kind of pay? And around going back to the liability question, I think it's important when we talk about the polluter pay principle in Canada, and we try to follow that. And I believe there is also a structure in place, especially on the HNS fund for hazardous and noxious substances, where any shipper or carrier, I would say any shipper contributes to that fund, so that in case there is a further damage or requires further liability, that fund can be utilized. So I would say my recommendation would be to kind of use that framework rather than introducing another fee, because it's an internationally accepted standard, and any carriers or containers or shippers would be used to that in different countries. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughts, Captain Madawal. My concern is that the current framework that we have many coastal communities who are bearing the costs, unfortunately. So looking at ways that we can better set up a system where coastal communities aren't bearing the brunt of the financial costs, but also our marine environments. So I do appreciate looking at what's in place and then improving that.
Thank you, Ms.
Perhaps
Barron.
I can... Oh,
We're
my
gone
time
a
is
little bit
up.
over.
Thank you.
We'll now go to Mr. Small for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming here today and taking part in this very important study. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, so my angle is more on prevention, because it's much easier to prevent these things from happening than to try to clean it up afterwards. With today's technology, was it necessary for the Zim Kingston to enter the storm, or could it have paused in its journey to avoid the storm? What's your take on that, Captain Singh?
My take on that is that the vessel had at its disposal the equipment and weather forecasting that was utilized by the vessel's captain to make a decision that at that time he felt was the best decision that he could make. I would hate to speculate that he had additional information that could have been utilized to make a better decision. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. Now to Captain Madiwal. And it's well known and a big concern that container spill frequency is becoming more of a threat. And it's a big concern to underwriters and insurance companies. Commercial pressure on masters to meet their schedules often cause them to sail in heavier weather than they should. Was the Zim Kingston under timeline pressure to dock and offload in Vancouver, to the best of your knowledge?
Yeah, thank you, Clifford, for that question. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think so. The Zim Kingston was under any pressure to kind of dock because that was exactly the reason. Because of the congestion in the port, the vessel was required to kind of wait for many days before they could actually dock. So there was definitely time at hand. And again, the pressure on the master, I think there's again a framework which we call the International Safety Management Code, and the master definitely has an overriding responsibility around the safety of the vessel, cargo, and the crew on board.
So he didn't have to enter the dangerous quadrant. He didn't have to enter the dangerous quadrant of that storm. He could have held back by the sounds of it. My next question is regarding the integrity of securing gear. Do you know how often this gear is inspected and tested to make sure its integrity is suitable for the extreme stresses that gear comes under?
Yeah, so there's a robust protocol on that is followed by the ship owner and also supervised and managed by the class certification that actually certifies the class of the vessel. And I believe there is an annual inspection regime, there's a quadrennial inspection regime, and any item that is broken, twisted, or required replacement, that has been replaced according to that process. And records are all available on the board. And Transport Canada Marine Safety and Security is the lead agency who's responsible to verify those things when the vessel arrives in the port.
Minute and a half.
Got a minute and a half. Woohoo! So
Don't get excited.
another question for you, Captain Madiwal. How accurate are the reported load weights in these containers to make sure that the ship is not too top heavy, and the load plans for the containers on board? Can we be confident that the process is not rushed in foreign ports in order to make timelines?
Yeah, excellent question, Clifford. This is something that the issue was bothering all the global community and the container carriers, and also the safety of the container vessels. And I believe it was about 6 to 7 years ago when IMO implemented the mandatory weighing of all the containers. Because if you know, the container vessels are generally top heavy, so that also creates some stability issues. So to ensure the stability and the safety of the vessel and the crew, it was important that all the containers are weighed before loading, and all that is included in the plan and also been verified ashore. And also finally, after loading, the master also has to verify that the vessel is safe for voyage.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Small. It's 10 seconds left on the clock. We'll use that somewhere along the way. But that comes to the end of our first hour of testimony. I want to say thank you to Captain Madiwal and Captain Singh for appearing before committee today, although it by virtually versus being here in person. We do appreciate your appearance, and I'm sure everybody has been enlightened by the knowledge you've shared here today. We'll recess for a couple of moments now to change out to our next panel of witnesses before we begin questioning.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Remind everyone that interpretation services are available for this meeting. Please inform me immediately if
I'd like to remind you that we have interpreting services. Please let me know immediately if interpretation services have been lost, and we'll be sure that they're back before we resume. The raised hand button can be used at the bottom of the screen if you'd like to alert the chair. I'd like to remind you that when you want to speak, click on the microphone icon to speak. Speak slowly and clearly, and when you're not speaking, your microphone should be turned off. Please remember.
From the Living Ocean Society, we have Karen Riston, Executive Director. And from the Surfrider Foundation of Canada, we have Lucas Harris, Executive Director, and Elise Hoyland, Youth Coordinator, Pacific Rim Chapter. We'll now hear opening remarks from Ms. Riston for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. With apologies to the interpreter, I realized this morning my notes are about too long by half, so I'm going to speed through some of the initial remarks I was going to make. I'd like to touch very briefly on some of the legal and economic drivers that are behind the alarming increase in the number of containers.
Ms. Riston, lift the boom a little bit higher, halfway between your lip and nose. There you go. That looks better.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Today, I'd like to review some of the legal and economic drivers behind the dramatic increase in container losses in recent years, to touch on some of the risks these have posed for BC waters that we find unacceptable and controllable, and finally propose some solutions for the committee's consideration. Very briefly, the international regime governing container ship traffic is outdated. It was created in 1924 and has not been upgraded to reflect modern concepts of liability, of consequences for negligence, or the risks posed by the type of cargo that's now being carried to the ocean. Canada has been a bit of a laggard in this respect, in that there have been several attempts to improve and update the rules. We are not signatory to those. Between the existing legal regime that minimizes liability for the ship's carrier and the economic pressures to deliver more goods faster, we can expect that without any intervention, the number of container spills is only going to increase. This poses risks for the ocean, its inhabitants, and coastal communities. They're bearing risks that properly belong to the shippers and the carriers. Once a container is lost at sea, unless it's posing a hazard to navigation, it's lost. Nothing is done to recover it, primarily because we can't track it. Modern technology could solve that problem. The risks that are borne by the ocean and coastal communities are nearly impossible to qualify or quantify, largely because little is known about what's being carried aboard the container ship. The manifests aren't required to provide detail on the nature of the goods and the risks that they pose for the ocean, with the sole exception of those listed as dangerous or hazardous and noxious substances. And in the case of these goods, there doesn't appear to be any limit on the danger that can be mixed in with more benign cargo. The provisions for safe stowage of that cargo are purely voluntary. The Zim spill provided us with 3 examples of what can go wrong in such a regime. First of all, it was carrying chemicals capable of spontaneous combustion when exposed to moisture on an open deck. There's nothing in the rules or codes of conduct to prevent this, but it beggars belief that such a casual approach to the carriage of highly volatile chemicals and to the property of others could actually be part of an internationally accepted regime. It's fortunate that there was no loss of life as a result of the fire on board the Zim Kingston. And it's also fortunate the ship didn't break up or damage the property of other shippers. And this is solely due to the fortuitous presence of 2 Maersk tugs, salvage tugs with the pumping capacity capable of keeping the ship cooled while the fire burned out. The first shortcoming demonstrated by the Zim spill is that we have neither the rules to prevent toxic chemical releases, fires, or explosions, nor the equipment to deal with them when they occur. The second shortcoming exposed by the Zim incident is that we really have no idea what to expect from the missing sunken containers. 2 of them are known to contain a chemical that is acutely toxic to aquatic organisms, and we have no idea where they are or what condition the cargo is in. 102 of the containers are simply mysteries. We're told that the manifest, which is not made public, describes the cargo only in the most general sense. We have no means of assessing the size or nature of the risk that has been consigned to the ocean. How then are we to begin to hold the polluter to account for the risk, or to plan and pay for a response when those sunken containers break up and release their content? The third problem exposed by the ZIM spill is that Canada has no container spill response plan, no trained workforce to respond, no policy on cleanup endpoints. In short, there is a policy vacuum where container spills are concerned. In that void, the ship's owner retained an agent with no shoreline salvage experience, no knowledge of the local terrain, infrastructure, or response assets, and gave him command of the entire operation. That agent decided to prioritize the removal of goods that were still contained in a beached container over the goods that were strewn all over the beach. That choice is largely responsible for the fact that debris is now strewn on every beach from Haida Gwaii to Tofino at the very least. The mindset that gave rise to that above choice is at least consistent with the nature of the whole international scheme governing carriage. Whatever is already spilled is lost and gone forever. What's still contained is potentially salvage at best, and at worst, removing it will prevent further loss. What's entirely missing from this approach to spill response is a focus on preventing damage to the ocean and to the life that depends most directly on it. The spilled cargo posed a real and immediate threat of widespread plastic and other more toxic pollution, damage to coastal communities, and damage to wildlife that did not even register in the priority-making process. That is the policy void that I hope this committee will seek to fill.
Thank you, Ms. Riston. The time has expired for your opening remarks. If you've provided your opening remarks to the committee, we have them in writing. If not, if you would do that, we'd appreciate it. We'll now go to Mr. Harris for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, members of the Standing Committee. My name is Lucas Harris. I'm the Executive Director of Surfrider Foundation Canada. I live in Victoria, BC. I acknowledge with respect the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. I'm meeting with you today from San Clemente, California, the traditional territory of the Akjashaman people. The Surfrider Foundation is a nonprofit grassroots organization dedicated to the protection and the enjoyment of the world's oceans, waves, and beaches for all people through a powerful activist network. Based in British Columbia, Surfrider Foundation Canada is part of the global surfrider community of international affiliates located in Argentina, Australia, Europe, Japan, Senegal, and the United States. Surfrider is a non-profit corporation and a registered charity in Canada, and currently has 3 local volunteer-led grassroots chapters in Tofino and Ucluelet, that's the Pacific Rim chapter, also in Victoria, known as the Vancouver Island chapter, and in Vancouver as well. The organization also supports 2 youth school clubs at the University of Victoria and Ucluelet Secondary School. Surfrider focuses on addressing several key coastal environmental issues, including plastics reduction, ocean protection, beach access, coastal preservation, and water quality. But most relevant to the issue of marine cargo container spills is our work on ocean protection and defending the oceans from challenges threatening the vitality of the ecosystems. Our ocean faces growing challenges from pollution, habitat loss, development, and climate change. If that wasn't enough, shipping threatens to crowd our oceans and degrade the health of the ecosystem to the impact of cargo container spills and the debris they create. Surfrider Foundation Canada works to protect our ocean and address dangers to it today and in the future. Our ocean protection initiative includes mobilizing grassroots campaigns to respond to the cleanup needs associated with marine cargo container spills and participating in regional ocean planning. I'll now pass it off to my colleague, Alice Toyland.
Thanks, Lucas. Hi, my name is Alice Hoyland. I'm the Youth Programme Coordinator for the Pacific Rim chapter of Surfrider Foundation Canada, and I've been leading the organisation's response to marine cargo container spills. I'm grateful to live within the traditional and unceded territories of the Tloquet Face Nation here in Tofino. The full impact of container spills is hard to determine. The immediate ramifications of spill, which happen in nearshore environments, are most tangible: solid waste polluting shorelines, entanglement and injury to fauna, and navigational hazards to boaters from floating debris. However, spills that happen on the open ocean also have damaging consequences to shoreline and coastal ecosystems. Containers and their cargo, particularly plastics, can persist in the marine environment for decades, if not centuries, and circulate in ocean currents, absorbing pollutants and eventually making landfall. Surfrider Canada has been on the front lines of marine debris mitigation efforts in BC for many years, including container spill response. In 2016, the Hanjin Seattle lost 35 empty containers near the mouth of Juan de Fuca. Fragments and containers and their plastic foam insulation lined the west coast of Vancouver Island. Response was slow, debris was spreading, so Surfrider mobilized volunteers liaising with various government agencies and First Nations partners to execute debris removal efforts. 7 months later, some compensation was eventually obtained from Hanjin, but it was in no way commensurate to the scale of work that was required. The magnitude of resources necessary to tackle this kind of spill demonstrated the urgent need for federal support, and Surfrider welcomed the development of Motion 151, a national strategy to combat marine plastic pollution, which was to include the creation of annual dedicated. In the wake of Zim Kingston, it's become clear that there's still considerable work to do to close the legislative gaps identified after Hanjin. After hearing of the spill in October 2021, Surfrider immediately began liaising with Canadian Coast Guard and the BC Marine Debris Working Group. Our network has got a long history of collaboration, and we have volunteer resources ready to deploy within days of the initial spill. Unfortunately, it was weeks before our group was tasked, and at that point, king tides had refloated much of the spilled debris, distributing it over an increasingly large geographic area. Furthermore, wind and wave action had already disintegrated some of the debris, and without a public manifest of lost cargo, given the extensive stretch of coastline affected, we had serious concerns about how to accurately identify and monitor the spread of debris in order to hold the responsible parties accountable for the full cost of cleanup. To mitigate the impact of container spills in coastal environment, it's essential to find ways to prevent spills. But when they do occur, Surfrider Canada is providing 3 recommendations for the committee to consider. Firstly, to increase spill response capacity in relation to marine cargo container spills, which must include the knowledge, skills and equipment necessary to address...
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président. Je suis sincèrement...
Call to order. I apologize. I must congratulate our interpreter. He's doing an exceptional job, but the speed is such that not only are we missing words, but unfortunately the interpreter is having trouble actually catching a breath. It is so precious, all of this, and this is not counting as time, but really I would like to hear you. And unfortunately, I'm missing a lot of what you're saying. If there's a way for the chair, please, to ask you to slow down your pace so that we could all be able to be assisted in what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
I think that has just been asked, so no need of me repeating it. But again, you have about 15 seconds left as it is on your time of 5 minutes. But please remember to talk slowly for the interpreters. They're trying to keep up, and they do their best and doing a fantastic job.
Apologies, I'll speak more slowly. Essentially, I'd just like to leave you with the recommendations that Surfrider Canada would like to put forward, primarily to increase spill response capacity in relation to marine container spills, implement a marine debris monitoring and management plan that adequately addresses all forms of marine debris impacting coastlines, and also to provide greater transparency on the contents of marine container spills and increased accountability to parties that are responsible. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to our questioning, and I'll go to Mr. Perkins first for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, witnesses. Those were both fascinating presentations, and we certainly sympathize with the need to try and get everything in that you want to get in when you have limited time. So with that in mind, I think my first question will be to Ms. Riston, if I've pronounced your name correctly. I believe I have. I don't think you had a chance to talk about your solutions in your presentation. I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of it. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that portion of your presentation, please.
Certainly. Thank you for the question. I'm getting terrible feedback. Is the committee hearing that as well? No? All right. When we found with the international oil spill regime that it was likely that the international agreements didn't provide enough compensation to pay for the likely cost of spills and cleanup. Canada set about creating its own fund, a supplementary system to support cleanup efforts. They imposed a small levy on the volume of oil being transmitted through Canadian ports, and they created the Oil Spill Pollution Fund. That's exactly the kind of approach we're recommending taking here. It has the benefit of spreading the risk that is currently borne by the ocean and by coastal communities, and spreading it out over a vast number of players. The number of containers being shipped through our ports is huge. The levy would only need to be quite small in order to create a substantial fund that could then be used to fund and create a permanent joint spill response task force. And when I say joint, I mean joint with the First Nations on whose territory these spills occur, the federal government and the provincial government. This has to be done. Sorry, I'm having sound trouble again. This has to be done cooperatively with all jurisdictions, because all jurisdictions are fully engaged in dealing with the sequelae of a spill. Such a force would need to be tasked with creating geographic response plans, to planning the response timelines, setting policy for response objectives, endpoints of the cleanup, if you will. It needs to recruit, train, equip, and drill a workforce that's capable of responding to spills quickly, and to develop the infrastructure that's needed to support that task force, because there is virtually no infrastructure in most of these remote communities that are, remote areas that are impacted by the spills. There's also work that needs to be done at the international level, and that is to modernize the shipping regime. This is unacceptable that it continues to provide virtually no liability. And in the face of economic drivers that are creating larger ships that are less seaworthy in the face of increasing Pacific storms, we absolutely need some intervention here to update that regime. It's going to take years and cooperation of trade partners for sure, but Canada can play a leading role in that, and I believe we should. Work needs to be done at both the IMO and the United Nations Environment Program, where we could work on eliminating expanded polystyrene foam as a packing material. Certainly in the case of anything being shipped by marine container. And finally, we need response equipment that's commensurate with the size of the ships and the nature of the cargo that's using our ports. This is a point we made throughout the hearings into the pipelines that were scheduled for Vancouver and the Central Coast. We just don't have.
Par rapport au règlement, Monsieur le Président, probablement.
Point of order. Ms. Christer, can I ask you to...
Crackling through the sound system. The boom on your headset, just lift it a little higher. Okay, we'll try it there.
Right, thank you. I was making my final point, which is that we need to upgrade the response assets that we have here. The tugs that were retained by the federal government to deal with spill response were clearly not sufficiently powered to deal with the fire on board the Zim Kingston. That could have been a disaster of incredible proportion had the Maersk tugs not been available to put that fire out. This is something that we need to turn our attention to for all modes of shipping, that we have the towing and salvage capacity, firefighting capacity that is required by the types of cargo that are being sent through our ports.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I've got about a minute left. So if we could just, on the next question, we've heard testimony that the liability is only up to 6 years for container spills within our waters. And obviously, we don't track or know where a lot of the containers are when they come off, as you mentioned. So what technology and what changes would you make to the liability issue so that as this develops, we have a greater ability to pursue the companies and their insurance companies for these spills?
Short answer.
Short answer. The increasing the liability insurance is obviously the easiest and first move to make. Changing the assignment of liability, though, that's created under the Hague-Visby rules that currently govern shipping, that needs to change because the ship owners are not liable for errors of seamanship, and they should be. They have the equipment to predict weather that they didn't have in 1924 when these rules were made. They should take on a greater liability so as to take greater care with their cargo.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Ms. Worston, I'm sorry, I'm looking through the notes, and I don't have the identification of your organization. Who do you belong to?
Apologies. I am the executive director of the Living Oceans Society. We're a nonprofit organization based in Sointula, BC.
The issue with the rules governing ships, how they're loaded, how they're operated, et cetera, are international, of course, because they move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Generally speaking, are you aware, for instance, if a ship is coming into Vancouver Harbor, is it likely that they'll be visiting other ports up and down the West Coast as part of their overall voyage?
I don't think one can generalize about ships in general. It is certainly possible, but we need to be more specific.
We can have the most wonderful rules, but it would seem that international agreements would distill them down to the lowest common denominator. You know, if we're dealing with ships that are going from port to port to port up and down a particular coast of a continent. You said that the vessels being put into service are less seaworthy. What do you have to back up that claim?
Perhaps less seaworthy is the wrong term. They are less resilient to the types of storms that we're seeing more frequently in the Pacific Ocean in particular. Longer ships.
Any technical information to offer us that you could maybe send offline to have as we deliberate our recommendations?
I certainly can, yes.
That would be excellent. You mentioned, too, that I think it was the Maersk vessels that were able to help, fight the fire. Are you proposing that the federal government essentially duplicate the capacity that's already there in the private sector, or do you think that there's a partnership or some kind of mobilization agreement, where we can take advantage of material and facilities that are in place already?
Those tugs are not necessarily available to us on demand for spill. That's the problem with relying on the private sector assets. Those two tugs just happen to be in Victoria at the right time. We need reliable capacity for responding to spills that we can call on when we need it. So yes, I'm suggesting that the federal government should invest in it and that it should be at least in part paid for by a levy on the shippers.
Mr. Harris, what's the annual budget of Surfrider? What kind of money does it take to keep your organization afloat, if you'll pardon that?
Thank you for the question. Surfrider Foundation Canada is a grassroots organization, and we are in the beginning stages of becoming a formal international affiliate of the broader Surfrider Foundation network. Current annual budget right now is around $160,000 for several paid staff and some sort of essential operation activities.
Okay, that's the reason for asking that question is that as we have investigated a number of different aspects of what goes on in the ocean, et cetera, I'm impressed but at the same time concerned about the number of organizations that seem to crop up and present themselves to us that are, have tremendous goals and, really want to do a great deal of good work, but there seems to be so many of them. And I just don't know if we're diluting our overall effort by having so many people wanting to do good, that we're duplicating effort, that we're uncoordinated, all of those things. I mean, does that concern you, or do you see any effort, in fact, to pull together all these NGOs who all want to do the right thing, but may be getting in each other's way?
Oh, excellent question, Mr. Hardy. I see where you're coming from, and I would say in response that Surfrider Foundation has been one of the key organizations involved in the marine debris issue in BC. We did some of the first remote cleanups back in 2010 and have continued doing that type of work since, really raising awareness about the scale of the issue of marine debris impact on the coast of British Columbia. And in fact, we observe the need for coordination amongst organizations. And we, in fact, connected with Ms. Riston and her organization early on and collaborated to be the co-founders of the BC Marine Debris Working Group, which at that point was called the Vancouver Island Marine Debris Working Group. So we, of course, are very much tuned into the need for cross-collaboration across this myriad of environmental groups. But in fact, we've been around since the beginning of this issue, I would argue, both Living Oceans and Surfrider Foundation, and are definitely seeking solutions to increase collaboration across the grassroots and nonprofit sector.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Thank you, Mr. Arnold. There's only about 12 seconds left in your time, and okay. Well, I'll say it now, so as Mel will have it for the end of his questioning. Right. Thank you. So, Mr. Arnold, over to you. Oh no, you've already. No. Sorry, you got me all confused now, Mr. Hardy. But now that I got your name straight, we'll go to Madame Gaudreau for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to our dear witnesses. I don't have a lot of questions, because I'd like to use more of my time to express myself. For the public and people watching us, anyhow, this is being recorded. We'll be able to circulate this. I am extremely happy to have heard you this morning, because for a few minutes now, I've been hearing all kinds of comments that touch me deeply. Please understand that the work that you do is not only essential, but don't give up. Keep going, because right now, what's happening is that the true issues are coming to the fore. And as was said in our meeting, that there's really an urgency in terms of responding. Why? Because there has been an increase in imports and exports and the port's capacities, both on Eastern Canada with the St. Lawrence and in BC. I have heard what you have said, and I have listened closely to your recommendations. I agree fully with you, and I'm eager for the committee to be able to name them. And it's hard for me to explain issues such as, containers fall overboard, and we won't find them. It's hard for me to explain to my children, well, it's kind of like, the cell phone network. There could be public safety issues, but, we can go to the moon, but we can't actually get a cell network everywhere in Quebec and in Canada. It's similar in the oceans. We've got all the technology, but unfortunately, what don't we have? We don't have the political will. I would like you to feel right now that there are people, that there are members of Parliament who support you and who believe you. Your voice is extremely important to be able to move things forward. And just a minute ago, I was hearing people say, there's all kinds of assistance all over the place. I would say, on the contrary, a sprinkling of this. If you are present and you are vigilant, it's because the government hasn't done its job. This is a reaction. This community action is to be able to save our Mother Earth. And to me, this is proof that today, political will is what we need to be able to perceive. So your work must continue, and you really have to keep hammering at it. I would invite you not to wait to be called to speak to us. I do find that your testimonies were extremely explicit, but I'm saying to you, with the new structure that we have, you've heard about it, there's an alliance, so there are projects that are going to be easier to get through at the government level. So I dare to hope that ultimately that, we're going to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. So I have less than 2 minutes left. I'd like to hear what you have to say about the statement that we heard last Tuesday, according to which science, I imagine you've heard this, that science states, and I haven't seen the report, that hazardous materials that fall into the oceans will dissolve, and then once they're dissolved, there's no more problem. With your expertise, I'd like to hear what you have to say about this, all three of you. I think there's, a minute and a half left, Chair? Go ahead, each of you in turn.
Well, if I can begin, the solution to pollution was never dilution. These containers, had they washed up in nearshore waters, the ones that contain the dangerous chemicals, could have wiped out all life in an inlet or a bay. We don't know the volume of the material that was actually contained in them, so we can't really properly quantify the risk, and that's just wrong. We need to be able to do that.
I'd love to jump in there as well. I think there's serious concerns about long-term monitoring as well. When we can't accurately track where these containers are, and we don't know where the load of chemicals eventually will spill, it's almost impossible for us to engage in any long-term monitoring for us to fully understand from a scientific perspective what the ramifications of that chemical being in the aquatic environment is going to be. And until we have that information, we can't categorically say what is or isn't going to happen from a scientific perspective. And I find that personally unacceptable, that we are accepting that there is a certain level of chemical pollution that is okay in our waters.
Now I'll add that Canada is endowed with some of the most amazing natural environment spaces and ecosystems, and it's in the best interest of the committee to think about proactively being cautious about how we manage these materials and respond to spills. It's in our best interest to do all we can to find ways to reduce the impact to the natural environment. And there's an opportunity here to really demonstrate leadership in a way that is desperately needed to reduce the impact of these types of spills. So avoiding acknowledging the allowance of spills and considering that the material won't be of impact, I think would be a bad approach. It's important to find ways to really avoid these spills from happening altogether.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I guess first and foremost, I want to express a huge thank you for all the work that you're doing to protect our coasts and working on such a small shoestring budget. And, it's clear that there have been many challenges in being able to do the work that you're doing. So it is incredible what you're able to accomplish. I also want to thank you for your ongoing efforts to collaborate together. I'm impressed by the work that's coming out of the BC Marine Working Group and your ongoing efforts to collaborate amongst one another as organizations that are doing this work, but also to collaborate and communicate with the Coast Guard, all those involved, and in particular with those who are contracted to take on this work by the shipper. I'm hearing from everybody that I've spoken to so far, the challenges in having a shipper contract an organization to come in and do the cleanup who does not understand the landscape in which we're working with, who's not communicating effectively with those who are on the ground, the First Nations, organizations like yourself. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit, perhaps this could go to Ms. Riston. We heard from the Coast Guard officials about their work of wanting to work alongside First Nations. However, we did see a big disconnect in, for example, with communications with the Quetzino First Nations in the first few weeks. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to this and the challenges and just expand on this a little bit, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think that Coast Guard is still grappling with fully taking on board the incident command system, and that it does not yet have permanent and reliable connections with the First Nations communities who ought to have had a seat at the table from the get-go. I understand there was one nation at the table, but it was not Quatsino, and that's where the containers fetched up. That's where the locus of the on-the-ground cleanup effort occurred. I happen to know because I know Chief Tom Nelson. I telephoned him and discovered that the contractor had not contracted with him for labor to clean up the spill. And at the same time, the contractor was asking us, the BC Marine Debris Working Group, to send in volunteer labor. And that's just not right. The First Nations come first. So I told the contractor to go make a deal with Quatsino before speaking to us further about what labor was needed. And that all caused additional delay, but it had to happen. I mean, that is the way things should be done. And I think the Coast Guard, this is one reason why we recommend a joint spill response task force. The Coast Guard needs help in putting together the regional response plans and the regional response people, personnel, and equipment that are going to be needed. So let's get on with planning for it, because there's going to be another one of these spills soon.
Ms. Rustin, I'm wondering if those from Surfrider could speak a little bit more about the delays in getting permission to start your work, specifically on how that played out with the Zim Kingston. Perhaps I could ask Ms. Hoyland?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So immediately after the spill, as soon as we heard that it happened, we in the Pacific Rim branch, we started reaching out to our local Coast Guard networks here in Tofino and also the Pacific Rim National Park. The spill happened alarmingly close to where the Hanjin had happened 5 years previously. And so we were fully prepared for those containers to maybe wash up on beaches close to us. And so we wanted to get the plans in motion and to establish the connections with the federal agencies and people that are involved on the ground here. When it became clear that wasn't going to happen, that the containers were moving further north, we reached out to the BC Marine Debris Working Group and to Regional Command of Coast Guard to establish what resources we had available as a collective, and also to communicate that to Coast Guard so that, again, we knew what we had available and we were able to the importance of speed in these situations. The longer the stuff sits on the ground, the further it spreads, the worse the situation gets. And so we communicated that proactively. We were ready to respond. Unfortunately, because of the polluter pays principle and the need for the ship owner to contract someone to coordinate the cleanup, we were essentially actively actually dissuaded from engaging in any cleanup for weeks. And it wasn't until we approached the contractor to say, hey, these are the resources we've got, can we support you, that that conversation even went anywhere. So it was disappointing because, as I said, we had resources, human resources and boat assets and all of the frameworks that we've developed from working together for such a long time, ready to go and respond in a timely manner, but we weren't tasked to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Hoyland. Both yourself and Mr. Harris both spoke to the work that you did as an organization around the Hanjin Seattle spill in 2016. I think it's really important that we take the lessons learned from previous spills and also now from the Zim Kingston and apply them to our work moving forward. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the experience of the lessons learned from the previous spill in 2016 and how it compared to the response that we saw most recently with the Zim Kingston.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We've gone over time, so if the witnesses could submit an answer to that question in writing, I'm sure it would be appreciated. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for appearing today. It's great to hear the on the ground, at the edge of the water information that you're able to provide. I'll start off with Ms. Riston and possibly the same question to Ms. Hoyland. Government officials appeared at this committee 2 days ago, and one mentioned lessons learned from the Zim Kingston spill. However, when those officials were asked what lessons have been learned, they weren't able to provide specifics, but the committee was told that they're actually in the middle of the after-action report. which raises a question. If government departments and agencies consider this matter closed, in your opinion, were there deficiencies in the government's response to the Kingston incident, and were there lessons to inform and improve future responses? Ms. Reston first.
Thank you for that question. I would begin by saying I don't know, and it's rather alarming to me that I don't know, because I've been asking for information about the spill from Coast Guard and getting nothing back. I think all Canadians deserve to know what the spill response regime is and what lessons we learned from Zim Kingston. But there's simply no communication about this, even to those of us who were at least tangentially involved and certainly trying to be involved in the ongoing cleanup effort that's going to be required for the next decade or so to deal with this debris. I think it's very clear that the policy void I mentioned in my earlier remarks was readily apparent in this case. I don't know who established the endpoints for cleanup, but I can tell you I flew over some of the impacted beaches on Monday of this week and discovered easily identifiable pieces of debris from the Zim Kingston spill on the Helen Islands, on the Lands and Cox Islands and the Scott Island group inside a marine national wildlife area, and several along the North Coast Trail as well. The debris is still out there, and it is going to require further efforts to address.
Thank you.
I do not know.
Our time is so short. I wish you had more time. If there is more you'd like to contribute, we'd certainly like to see it in a written submission. Ms. Hoyland, would you say there are lessons learned to improve for future government responses?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for the question. As Karen has also alluded to, the policy gaps around responding to marine debris are as evident as they were after Hanjin. Unfortunately, the debris has spread. We know that it's affecting a huge stretch of the BC coastline. I'm alarmed to hear that we are in the after phase, because this is clearly an ongoing issue. It's clear to anyone that lives on the coast that this is an ongoing issue. The debris is very much still out there, and we're going to continue to encounter that debris, especially soon as there was 102 containers that are still unaccounted for. And so I'd say that the lessons learned are that we need a robust plan for marine debris management generally. It's impossible at this point to do a container spill cleanup, if you like. The stuff is so dispersed along the coast that it would be impossible for us to go out and recover every single item from Zim Kingston. But what we do need is a strategic plan for how we can continue to monitor our coastlines, continue to manage the marine debris issue that we are dealing with as coastal communities in BC.
Okay. Thank you for that. My riding in North Okanagan Shuswap this year, we suffered catastrophic wildfire issues, and I've heard from Indigenous communities that that their knowledge and capabilities could have been put to better use. Would you say there's an opportunity to, or is there room for better cataloging of resources that are available in local communities and better collaboration? I don't know if government could take on all of the monitoring and cleanup without local Indigenous communities, local volunteer organizations. Would you say there's better opportunity out there? Ms. Hoyland?
Briefly, yeah. I absolutely. I think the great opportunity here is that the BC Marine Debris Working Group has already had a great head start on that. We have existing relationships with First Nations communities, with the Guardians program that exists in a lot of those communities, and the local resources that exist for extracting marine debris and managing marine debris on a local scale. The Marine Debris Working Group is that for BC, which is an amazing asset that I'd recommend that government relies on for formulating that strategy and for further establishing relationships with First Nations communities as well.
Thank you.
In regards to
Thank you
marine
for
debris.
that. I know, Mr. Harris, you have your hand up. I don't know if that was to provide an answer or if there was something you weren't hearing, or...
I was just going to expand on what Ms. Hoyland said.
Okay, well, if you could do that in writing, because Mr. Reynolds' time has expired, it's gone a bit over, we'd appreciate it. We'll now go to Mr. Hanley for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my first questions are for Ms. Whiston. Again, thank you to all of you for presenting today. Fascinating testimony. My background is in health and in two career areas, emergency medicine and public health. So my interests are in the response, especially, and also the prevention aspects. But just, Ms. Whiston, on the, you talked about that surge in container spills in 2020. And could you elaborate a bit more on container losses and whether that was a kind of, was that a blip? Is there a trend over the years? And is this in proportion or out of proportion to the increasing volume of container traffic? In some ways, I would expect that with more experience, better technology, with more containers per ship, that container loss should go down in proportion to the volume, at least, if not overall, to achieve some kind of high standard of near zero loss.
Yes, thank you for that question. The fact is that the larger ships are more vulnerable to windage. They're stacking so many containers so high that these ships are quite vulnerable to losing their center of gravity, if you will, in the wind. And they're also vulnerable to high seas. A long ship in a high sea can suffer structural stress that can impair its integrity. So no, the bigger ships aren't giving rise to more safety. The additional safety equipment they have on board could give rise to more safety if they felt that they needed to be more careful. But because they're not liable for their judgments of seamanship under the International Convention, they're not more careful. They're simply responding to the economic drivers that cause them to want to bring more cargo more quickly.
Thanks. And you talked about the oil spill response as a kind of an international example, I think, of where we could potentially go with a container spill response. I think, and again, I hope I caught that right. But can you talk about some perhaps good examples in international practice with regard to something that we could emulate in terms of agreements or even more regional practices on cargo container spills prevention?
Well, internationally, there's been quite a bit of work done to improve the rules for carriage at sea. And that work is summarized in the Rotterdam Convention, to which we are not a party, driven largely by the EU, I believe. So if you wanted to look to a regime that provides more modern and realistic rules for the carriage, this multimodal carriage that didn't exist in 1924 when the existing rules were made, that is where I would look. In terms of good examples of a response mechanism, I would suggest that the best mechanisms spread the risk as far as possible with as little cost as possible to each player. And in that regard, a levy per container is exactly the right approach to take. With a very small levy on every container sent through our ports, we could create a fund that would fund a standing spill response effort that is joint with the communities, takes advantage of all those local assets and local know-how.
Thank you. Thanks. That's great. I just wanted to save my last, I think I have about a minute, and I just wanted to turn to more of the emergency response and maybe to Mr. Harris or Ms. Hoyland on the role of volunteers and in helping, clearly the spill, as you said, there's not really an end time. This is an ongoing effort, largely dependent on pooling of resources, volunteers. In helping organizations like yourselves or others scale up your ability to respond, where would you see that we could do better in investing more in resources to support grassroots organizations?
I'm happy to start, and then
In
Ms. Whelan can
15
jump in.
seconds, I think.
I think volunteers play a critical role, but I think that the responsibility goes much further beyond the role of our organizations. This is an opportunity for the federal government to really take a leadership role and find ways to allocate assets beyond our capacity. We're happy to help, but there's much work to be done, and we need assistance.
Thank you, Mr. Henley. We'll now go to Madame Godreau for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. As I have very little time, I would like to take this opportunity to tell you how much your presence is important and how important it is here, and also, if in fact you are active, it is because there is a lack of concrete action taken by the government. So keep it up. And I would urge you to make representations so that in the meanwhile, because I'm hearing that that reform is required, not just for you, I mean, employment insurance, privacy protection, there's lots of things that have to be reformed. But I would invite you to apply so that you could survive. You're important. We have work to do to determine the priorities. Clearly, you know as well as I do that fisheries and oceans is not a priority, even if you're talking about the environment and water quality and what we actually eat. The committee has a big job ahead of it. But I do have a question. Well, actually, I wanted to thank you for how close you are to the Indigenous communities and ask whether you have a recommendation with these communities. What would you like to say to us about the relationship we should pursue and improve with them?
First cut at that. Thank you for that question. The First Nations communities in question are quite small and remote, and they do not have the capacity at the present time to participate in the kind of standing joint task force that I suggest we need to have on this coast. They must be given some assistance with developing the capacity to participate on an ongoing basis in training and drilling. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, echo Karen's sentiments entirely in terms of capacity building and also engagement from the very beginning. It's so important to ensure that we are acknowledging the knowledge, experience, and wealth of information that exists within our First Nations communities in terms of marine stewardship. And so having First Nations voices on board through all parts of the planning process for this kind of response is imperative.
Yeah,
Thank you,
I'll
Madame
echo my colleagues' comments.
C'est terminé?
Thank you very much. Your time is...
2.5 minutes is not long in real time. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. Harris, my question is going to be going to you, so you can probably fill in some other pieces if you'd like there. But I wanted to appreciate what has come out of all of the witnesses here today around the fact that this is an ongoing issue. You know, this spill occurred, but we're continuing to see debris washing up on our shores. And I think it really does speak to the timeliness of this study occurring so that we can better understand how to both prevent these spills from occurring, but also to mitigate the environmental impacts and the costs to our coasts that will happen moving forward. And I'm wondering, Mr. Harris, if you can speak a little bit to the ongoing communications with Coast Guards as debris have continued to wash up on the shores. What does that look like with your work that has occurred to help clean up the debris?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I'm actually going to allow Ms. Hoyland to respond. She's been much more involved on the ground with the coordination with the different organizations involved.
Thanks, Lucas. Yeah, so we actually haven't had very much communication from Coast Guard in terms of the reports of the debris. The information that we have has come from information sharing between ourselves and our peers within the BC Marine Debris Working Group. So the information that we have available and the manifest, if you can call it that we've developed has purely been from the information that we've recorded as individual entities as members of the BC Marine Debris Working Group. So in terms of information that's been reported to Coast Guard, we haven't been made privy to that. I would very much like to suggest that open communication with Coast Guard will be very appreciated, though.
So just to clarify, you find debris on the beaches. What's the next step that you would take as an organization?
So we, if it's container-related debris, we have been keeping a record of that. So we've been taking coordinates, a photo where possible, and then sharing that within our network so that we can further build out our understanding of how far the debris is spreading, what types of debris are washing in where, and also to get a sense of, well, to gather evidence that this issue isn't over yet. There's also survey work that's been undertaken by Rugged Coast Research Society and Living Ocean Society. Surfrider has been involved in a minor part in terms of the survey work with helicopters as well, to get a broader sense of the larger stretch of coastline that's been affected.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. I know, Mr. Small, you're up next. We've got about 3 minutes left if you want to use that 3 minutes in questioning. Okay.
I'll just give each witness a minute each to tell us what they'd like to see out of this study. And yeah, so go. In the order that you're listed here. Karen first. Sorry, Miss Risson first.
Thank you. What I would most like to see is the establishment of the Joint Spill Response Task Force, integrating it among the federal, provincial, and First Nations jurisdictions involved, and getting it properly resourced to be able to respond to a spill in a timely manner.
Mr. Harris?
I think it's time to see leadership from the federal government to really add capacity with regard to spill response. You know, volunteers have done an amazing job rising to the occasion when these events do happen. But as you've heard today, there's so much more work that needs to be done to fill the gap. And I think it goes beyond the volunteer organizations. We're happy to play a critical role in being that on-the-ground feedback loop, but this is an opportunity now to really enter this space and create a spill response regime that will help really reduce the impact of the marine environment.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Ms. Hoyland?
Echoing everything that my colleagues have said here, and also adding that ongoing monitoring of and as part of a strategic marine debris management plan is essential for us to get a better understanding of the threats that are facing our coastline from marine debris, part of that being container cargo spills. It's absolutely unconscionable that these pre-consumer items that have been created and never used are being dumped wholesale into our oceans and left for communities to clean up. And so ongoing monitoring and a strategic plan that engages First Nations and the BC Marine Debris Working Group and coastal communities to address this issue and implement upstream solutions, including extended producer responsibility, is essential for moving forward.
And if I may, funding on a regular basis annually to fund all of the shoreline cleanup work that needs to be done, whether it's as a result of ongoing activity on the ocean or container spills.
Okay, I'd like to say thank you to our witnesses for their participation here at committee today and the informative information that you've shared with us. I want to remind members that before we go, I would like to ask members to get their witness lists to the clerk for the next study of scientific studies and advice for the DFO. And the deadline would be Monday, April 4th at 5 p.m. So if we could get that in. I'd like to also thank all committee members, but I want to thank Mr. Ellis for filling in for his colleague, Mr. Perkins, in the last 45 minutes or so. I know you didn't get a chance to participate, but I've seen you in the House, and I think you fit in quite well in your role as an MP. So again, welcome to committee. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the interpreters, analysts, clerk, and all staff. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.